All right, and our first review of the show will be the new Spike Lee film, The Five Bloods. It's exclusive on Netflix, I think. Am I right?
Yes, yeah, Netflix exclusive.
Yeah, so it's written and directed by Spike Lee. It's got quite an extensive cast, so I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but it's essentially a Vietnam War story based on 5 African American soldiers that during their time in Vietnam discover gold and treasure of, I don't want to go into too much detail, but they decide to hide that treasure and gold and eventually return to Vietnam to try and find it again. And I'll let Alistair run with this because I know he had quite a bit to say on the film. So what do you reckon?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a film of 2 parts, isn't it? It kind of starts off and, I mean, Spike Lee, as he always does, he sets his table out pretty quick, and the first things that we see, and it's also referenced at the end, we've got those kind of historical images, the found footage, and you know straight away this is going to be a politically charged film. And I mean, this is Spike Lee all over, isn't it?
Yeah, it's that sort of thing. Like you said, like you know what you're getting into with Spike Lee film, and I say that as a positive because I really like Spike Lee and I like a lot of his films. But you've hit the nail on the head already. It is 2 parts to this film, and annoyingly, one part is much better than the other. Not that the other's bad, but it's quite a differing result. I was so invested in some scenes and some like sequences, I was just waiting to get back to certain characters or get back to the early scenes in Vietnam compared to some of the modern day scenes.
Yeah, and let's talk about that quickly because there are a series. It's set over 2 eras, and you have this series of flashbacks, and these are kind of marked by this very visible and visual change in the aspect ratio and the stock that it was filmed on. I'm not an expert, so I can't say, but I know that
I think you're spot on there.
The traditional the filming of the flashback scenes are shot in 4:3, which is obviously a much more traditional aspect for film recording, and the color saturation changes. You know, it's incredibly crisp and high definition in present day, and I think they reflect the kind of eras in which the technology would have been used.
Yeah, and I don't know this for certain, so I'm speculating a little bit, but I imagine with someone like Spike Lee, he probably has gone out and purposely used the same stock film as would have been available in that day, or at least the closest he could get to it nowadays, because it seems like he's not the sort of type that would just throw it in as an after effect. He must have thought about that well in advance.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, the film it has this incredible kind of political presence to it, and this political presence is talking about kind of black soldiers in the Vietnam War who were representing the US when they were, I mean, and still are today, fighting their own battles in terms of, civil rights. And so we're looking at kind of a representation within a war that is kind of dubious in the first place in terms of, what it was trying to achieve. And, there are a lot of questions that are thrown up about the war itself, but the film highlights especially kind of this group of soldiers that have kind of been banded together and their connection and their relationship with each other, despite the fact that they have a very awkward relationship with the war that they're fighting themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's an annoying thing where you're so articulate that you've basically said everything I want to say anyway. But no, I think you're right, and I think it's one bonus of a Spike Lee film in that basically every film he's ever released, they've always been very timely and relevant to what is going on at the time of release and even years later. Saw that with BlacKkKlansman and have seen that throughout his career. So I think this is another one of those where the statements it's trying to make can be applied to present day and are very relevant. And from that sense, I love it, but overall, it's not my favourite Spike Lee film.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, in terms of the films that, I mean, you've got BlacKkKlansman as your act to follow. That's a difficult task.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a nice spot to be in, having like one of your best films you released followed up, and it's still a good film. It's just you're never going to compare to that one from before.
Yeah, and of course the soundtrack as well.
Yeah, we'll give a shout out to Terence Blanchard, who's done, from what I'm aware, he's done soundtracks on most Spike Lee films, and again, he's done it amazingly here. Like I was saying to you before, it's hard to do a Vietnam film, not only from a fresh perspective, which I think he has done with having it from the viewpoint of African American soldiers rather than the standard, like, American country boys that have been taken from their homes and stuff. And then, as well as that, it's hard to do a Vietnam film without having Rolling Stones playing or some early Black Sabbath song, and everyone's like, oh god, it's another Vietnam song I've heard in so many films. But Terence Blanchard does a really good job, I think, of keeping it era appropriate but really fresh.
Yeah, there's something about it that is it's very timely, and it has its own tone that it sets, and I think that's really important about this film as well. But let's we've got a lot to get through, so let's go for ratings now. We're rating every film on this podcast out of 10.
Yeah, there's not much reason behind it. We just thought it would be a useful way of remembering how much we liked certain films, to be honest, because we're going to get through a lot, so it's good to have a little index, I suppose. What do you want to go first, or shall I?
Well, I'll go first. It's, again, tough act to follow. I'm trying to see it on its own merits, and for that, I'm giving it an 8 out of 10.
All right, fair score. I'm going for 7, only because, I mean, I'm slightly blaming on Black Klansman for this, but I've also, like, Malcolm X is probably my favourite Spike Lee film, and I just know that because the certain sections of the story weren't always quite cohesive in not only narrative but quality, I just think like it was a good film, but because I've seen him do better, I can't give him any higher than a 7, I don't think. But I did enjoy it.
Fair enough.